Thousands of Filipinos leave their homeland chasing dreams of a better life, but for far too many, the journey ends in a chilling nightmare: homelessness. Which country tops this shocking list? In this video, we'll expose the heart-wrenching truth behind the journey of our overseas kababayan, revealing the 7 countries with the most homeless Filipino and the devastating reasons why so many dreams are shattered. The answer will shock you, but the stories will break your heart. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments, and I will give you a heart. Number 7 on our list is Italy, a country synonymous with high culture, breathtaking landscapes, and a lifestyle that draws in millions, including over 170,000 Filipinos. Our kababayan here are the silent pillars of Italy's service economy, working with unwavering dedication as caregivers, domestic helpers, and hospitality workers. Their dream is a classic one: a steady job, a reliable paycheck, and the chance to save enough to lift their families out of poverty. But for thousands, that dream is a fragile, beautiful piece of pottery that shatters when it hits the hard ground of reality. The central villain in this story is the runaway cost of living, especially in cities like Rome and Milan. Here, a small, often run-down apartment can easily devour over €1,000, 0 cents a month. To put that in perspective, that single expense can be the equivalent of an entire month's salary for many Filipino workers. It's a financial high-wire act where one slip means a devastating fall. Let me introduce you to Maria. Her story is one of thousands. Maria left her 2 children with her mother in Pampanga, promising to send enough money home to finish their education. She secured a job as a caregiver for an elderly Italian woman in Rome, a physically and emotionally demanding role. The pay was just enough to cover her share of the rent in a tiny shared room with 2 other women and send a modest amount home. For 3 years, she was a rock, a pillar of strength for her family and her employer. But then, tragedy struck. The elderly woman she cared for passed away. Overnight, Maria lost her job and her home, as her employment was tied directly to her living situation. With no savings and the next paycheck gone, she had just days to find a new place. The fear was a physical weight on her chest. She couldn't find a new employer who would sponsor her, and the high-priced housing market slammed its doors shut. She ended up on the streets for a few weeks, a ghost in a city that had once held so much promise. She told me, "Every time a tourist walked by, smiling and taking pictures of the Colosseum, I felt invisible. It was like I wasn't even a person anymore." She was one of the homeless Filipino abroad, an invisible casualty of a system that sees her as a disposable economic unit, not a human being. The numbers are staggering. Estimates suggest between 1,200 and 1,500 Filipinos in Italy are currently without stable housing. Many are like Maria, legally here one day, undocumented and invisible the next due to a lost job. They become afraid to seek help, fearing the immigration authorities. Without a stable address, they are cut off from basic human rights, access to healthcare, legal aid, and even banking services. They are forced to work off the books, taking any low-paying, often abusive job just to eat. Government programs exist, but critics argue they are too complex and culturally unaccommodating to reach the migrant workers who need them most. It's like building a beautiful, sturdy bridge, but then removing the steps, leaving it impossible for anyone to cross. This is a system that allows people to fall through the cracks and then blames them for not climbing out. Community nonprofits and a few dedicated churches are working overtime to fill the void, but the resources are stretched thin and the need is simply overwhelming. Maria was lucky. A church group founder gave her temporary shelter and helped her navigate the complex legal system to find a new job. She's back on her feet now, but she will never forget those few weeks of terror when the beautiful streets of Italy were nothing more than a cold, unforgiving pavement. Her story and countless others serve as a chilling warning. But here's the question. If this can happen in a developed European country known for its social safety nets, what does that mean for Filipinos and other vulnerable migrants in nations with far fewer protections? Stay with me, because our next stop is a land of unimaginable wealth, where the system itself is designed to bind workers to their employers, trapping them in a gilded cage that can quickly turn into a street-side prison. From the ancient charm of Italy, we leap to the chrome and glass future of the United Arab Emirates, a place of endless sunshine, glittering towers, and the promise of astronomical salaries. It's no wonder over 700,000 Filipinos have flocked here, seeing it as the ultimate gateway to financial freedom. They are the engine of this nation's rapid growth, working in construction, hospitality, and as domestic helpers, building the very palaces and serving the very people who live in them. But for thousands, this gleaming landscape is nothing more than a mirage, and the promise of a better life quickly dissolves into a desperate struggle for a place to sleep. The problem here is multifaceted, but a primary culprit is the sheer volatility of the employment landscape. It's a land where the cost of a simple shared room can exceed what a small family pays for an entire house back in the Philippines. This alone puts immense pressure on workers. But when you add in sudden job losses or a contract dispute, the financial ground beneath them can crumble in an instant. Listen to the story of Rodel, a young father from Laguna who came to Dubai to work as a hotel concierge. He was promised a good salary, health benefits, and subsidized housing in a clean worker dormitory. He signed a contract in Manila with a heart full of hope. But upon his arrival in Dubai, his employer told him the original contract was just a draft. The new one they handed him offered a lower salary, a much smaller housing allowance, and a clause that allowed them to reduce his hours at will. When he protested, they threatened to cancel his visa and send him home. This insidious practice is called contract substitution, and it's a brutal reality for countless migrant workers. For 2 years, Rodel gritted his teeth and endured, sending home what little he could. But when tourist season slowed, his hours were slashed and he couldn't make rent. He was asked to leave his shared room in the dormitory and found himself with nowhere to go. He spent 3 harrowing months sleeping on the streets of Dubai, hiding in parks at night, and spending his days at the Philippine embassy, desperately waiting for help. He told me, "I would walk past all the fancy restaurants I used to work at, seeing people laughing and spending money without a care in the world. I was invisible, a ghost haunting the city I had come to help build. That's when I realized the dream wasn't for us, it was for them." The statistics behind Rodel's story are hard to stomach. Estimates indicate that anywhere from 2,000 to 2,500 Filipinos in the UAE are currently without stable housing. Many are forced into overcrowded living conditions, sleeping in shifts in tiny rooms, or even hiding in unfinished buildings, terrified of being caught. Once a worker loses their legal status, the doors to formal housing, banking, and healthcare slam shut. They are forced to work in the shadows, taking illegal jobs that pay a fraction of what they deserve, further exposing them to abuse. The UAE government points to its labor reforms and amnesty programs as proof of their efforts to protect workers. They claim that anyone with a grievance can file a complaint, but advocates on the ground know a different truth. A deep-seated fear of retaliation prevents many from speaking out. For those who are undocumented, the risk of arrest and immediate deportation is a powerful deterrent to seeking any form of help. Rodel was eventually granted an amnesty visa and repatriated, but the emotional scars of his experience are a heavy burden he carries to this day. This is the tragic reality of the Filipino homeless abroad in the UAE, a land of immense wealth, built on the backs of thousands of silent sufferers. This is a story about the devastating power of a system that can render you invisible in a city of millions, where a single signature on a piece of paper can erase your entire future. How is it possible that in one of the richest nations on earth, so many can still end up with absolutely nothing? From the scorching heat of the UAE, we make a massive jump to the vast, cold landscapes of Canada. For many Filipinos, Canada is the ultimate destination, a land of opportunity, a pathway to permanent residency, and the promise of a safe, stable future. It's home to nearly 1 million Filipinos, making it one of the largest and most well-established overseas communities in the world. They work in essential roles, healthcare, hospitality, skilled trades, contributing their talents to a country that seems to welcome them with open arms. But for a heartbreaking number of these individuals, the reality they encounter is far colder than the Canadian winter, and the dream of a new home is shattered by the impossible cost of a roof over their heads. The situation is dire in cities like Toronto and Vancouver, where the housing crisis has reached an unprecedented peak. A 1-bedroom apartment in these bustling hubs can easily consume half, if not more, of a worker's monthly income. This leaves no room for error, no safety net for the unexpected. This is the story of a dedicated healthcare worker named Leo. He and his wife, a dental assistant, came to Toronto on a temporary work permit. They both had steady, well-paying jobs, and for the first 2 years, they lived in a small apartment and saved diligently, sending money home to support their son's education. They were on track for permanent residency, a future they had worked so hard to build, but then an administrative mistake happened. Their temporary work permit renewal was delayed due to a bureaucratic error, and their jobs were put on hold. Because their legal status was in limbo, they were no longer eligible for the social services they had been contributing to. Their landlord, seeing the opportunity, raised their rent to an astronomical amount. With their income frozen and no way to pay, they were forced out. Their life savings, which were meant to build a future, were instead funneled into a desperate search for a new place they couldn't afford. They became two of the estimated 2,500 to 3,000 Filipinos currently experiencing homelessness in Canada. They spent weeks sleeping in their car, a silent and desperate part of the bustling city traffic. Leo told me, "I would put on my professional clothes in the morning, brush my teeth at a gas station, and go to work in a clinic as if nothing was wrong. It was a terrible secret. I felt so much shame, but how do you tell your boss you're sleeping in a car in the middle of winter?" When the sub-normal temperatures hit, their homelessness was no longer just an inconvenience, it was a deadly threat. The Canadian government has many social services and affordable housing initiatives, but they are often complex and slow to navigate. For temporary foreign workers like Leo and his wife, the timeline for renewing visas is unforgivingly strict, and any gap in employment can instantly strip them of their legal status and, with it, their access to support programs. It's like being on a fast-moving treadmill where one small stumble sends you flying off. Dedicated Filipino community groups and churches have stepped in to offer emergency funds, food, and temporary housing, but their resources are stretched to the absolute limit. Leo and his wife were eventually helped by a community organization that expedited their case and found them temporary housing, but their journey is a powerful reminder that even in a country celebrated for its kindness and opportunity, there is a hidden population of homeless Filipino abroad who have been failed by a system that simply moves too slowly to save them. It's a story that reveals the cold reality behind the maple leaf dream. Keep watching, because our next country is one of the wealthiest in the Middle East, a nation that spent billions to host the world, but whose labor system has pushed thousands of Filipinos into the streets. Number 4 takes us to Qatar, a nation where the desert sun blazes over an impossibly luxurious skyline and billion-dollar stadiums rise from the sand. As one of the world's richest countries per capita, Qatar's image is one of boundless prosperity. But behind this polished facade, thousands of Filipinos are locked in a desperate struggle to keep a roof over their heads. With around 300,000 Filipinos working here in construction, healthcare, and hospitality, the promise was irresistible: high, tax-free wages and the chance to secure a future for their families. The reality, however, is a far more brutal story of unpaid salaries, sudden job losses, and a housing market that remains stubbornly out of reach. The numbers are staggering. Estimates suggest that between 2,500 and 3,500 Filipinos in Qatar are currently without stable housing. Some are crammed into rooms with more than a dozen other workers, while others are forced to hide in unfinished buildings or makeshift shelters, always on the run from the authorities. The primary culprit is the deeply flawed and controversial kafala system, which, though officially reformed, still holds enormous power in practice. The system ties a worker's legal status directly to their employer. This is not a partnership. It is a form of indentured servitude. Lose your job or walk away from an abusive situation and you instantly lose your visa. Without legal status, you cannot rent an apartment, open a bank account, or access formal help. It's a legal trap designed to keep workers compliant and vulnerable. Let's talk about a man named June. He came to Qatar to work in a construction crew for one of the multi-billion-dollar projects. The job was hard, the heat was unbearable, but he was sending a good portion of his salary home every month to his wife and 2 young daughters in Cebu. For a year, everything was fine, but then the company he worked for went bankrupt. Overnight, June and his entire crew were laid off, their passports confiscated, and their last 2 months of wages were withheld. He was suddenly one of the many homeless Filipino abroad with no legal status, no money, and no way to get his passport back. He spent months living in a crowded, unsanitary labor camp, a forgotten ghost in a city he had helped build. He told me, "I would see the buildings I put up from the street. They were so beautiful, so perfect, but I was not allowed in them. I was a part of this city, but I had no place in it." He and his fellow workers spent their days lining up at the Philippine embassy begging for help. They had no money for a plane ticket home, and the embassy's shelter was always at full capacity. While the Qatari government points to new labor laws and a minimum wage, human rights advocates argue that enforcement is weak and the fear of retaliation keeps many workers silent. Workers fleeing abuse still face threats and withheld passports. For June, the community became his only lifeline. fellow Filipinos would share their limited food and water. A local church group eventually managed to secure a spot for him at the embassy shelter and, after a long, bureaucratic fight, got his passport back and a ticket home. But his story is a painful reminder that the promise of wealth in Qatar is often built on a foundation of human suffering, and that for many Filipinos, the only thing waiting for them is the unforgiving reality of the streets. And here's the unsettling question. If a system like kafala can persist and cause so much pain in a nation with so much wealth, what does that say about the value placed on the lives of migrant workers? Moving to the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, we arrive at number 3, Saudi Arabia. This kingdom of oil wealth and ambitious mega projects is also home to the largest population of overseas Filipinos in the Middle East, over 800,000 strong. Their contributions are immense, powering the nation's construction, healthcare, and domestic sectors. But for thousands of these hardworking kababayans, Saudi Arabia has become a place of survival, not success. The primary antagonist here is, once again, the kafala system, a framework that still looms large despite promises of reform. Under this system, a worker's legal status is inextricably tied to their employer. To lose your job or to flee an abusive employer is to lose your visa, your right to stay, and your access to housing, banking, and healthcare, all in a single devastating moment. Let's delve into the story of Lani, a domestic worker who came to Saudi Arabia to be a nanny for a wealthy family in Riyadh. Her initial contract promised a fair salary, a private room, and 1 day off a week. But from the moment she arrived, the terms were broken. Her passport was confiscated, her phone was taken, and she was forced to work 18-hour days with no day off. She was locked in the house, a prisoner in a gilded cage. For 2 years, she was denied any contact with her family, her wages were withheld, and she was subjected to constant verbal abuse. She told me, her voice trembling, they would call me khadama, just a servant. They wouldn't let me eat with them. I felt like I was less than human. One night, she managed to escape while the family was asleep, leaving with nothing but the clothes on her back. She became one of the estimated 3,000 to 3,500 Filipinos currently experiencing homelessness in Saudi Arabia. She spent the next several months living in a crowded embassy shelter, a place meant to be a refuge, but which was in reality a holding cell for people waiting for a long, bureaucratic fight for a flight home. The reality on the ground is harsh. Common causes of this widespread homelessness include unpaid wages, broken contracts, and horrific physical and verbal abuse. And for domestic workers like Lani, the problem is compounded by their exclusion from many of the limited labor reforms that have been passed for other professions. They are left particularly vulnerable, a legal and emotional no man's land. While Saudi officials point to recent changes that supposedly allow workers to change jobs, human rights advocates argue that these reforms are unevenly applied and often fail to protect the most vulnerable. Lani's plight, and that of countless other homeless Filipino abroad, shines a harsh light on a system that, for all its grand pronouncements, still fails to recognize the basic humanity of its migrant workforce. For Lani, hope came from the kindness of others, the embassy staff who fought for her case, and the fellow Filipinos who shared what little they had. She was eventually repatriated, but her dreams of building a better life were irrevocably shattered. This is a story about the devastating power imbalance between employer and employee, where a system can turn a home into a prison and a promise into a lie. The scale of this problem is so large that even the most dedicated aid organizations are overwhelmed. Next on our list at number 2 is Kuwait, a country of immense oil wealth and one of the highest concentrations of overseas Filipinos in the region. There are approximately 250,000 kababayan living and working here, but for a staggering number of them, a safe home is a luxury they cannot afford. The scale of this crisis is shocking. An estimated 4,000 to 5,000 Filipinos in Kuwait are homeless right now. Proportionately, this is one of the highest rates of Filipino homelessness in the entire Middle East. Many of these individuals are domestic workers who, like Lani in Saudi Arabia, fled abusive employers, and others simply lost their jobs and their legal status overnight. The root of this devastating crisis is the same insidious system we've been talking about, the kafala system. This system binds a worker's legal status directly to their employer, creating a situation where the worker's very existence in the country is a privilege granted by their sponsor, not a right. If you are fired, if you quit in protests of abuse, or if you escape a dangerous situation, you instantly become undocumented. Without legal status, you lose everything: your ability to have a housing contract, your access to a bank account, and any chance of formal help. Adding to this already grim picture are Kuwait's strict visa rules, which make it virtually impossible to find a new job or stay in the country legally without a sponsoring employer. This is a system that gives absolute power to the employer, and for too many, that power is used for abuse and exploitation. Consider the story of a young man named Alex who came to Kuwait with big dreams. He was hired as a hotel worker, but after a few months, his employer's business started to fail. The owner began withholding salaries and threatening to fire employees. When Alex and his colleagues protested, they were summarily fired and their legal status was revoked. Alex, now one of the homeless Filipino abroad, spent the next year of his life living in an abandoned, half-finished building with dozens of other undocumented workers, a forgotten part of the glittering city he had come to love. He told me, his voice hollow, "We were living like rats, hiding from the police, trying to find food. Every day was a fight to survive, a game of cat and mouse. I would call my wife and tell her everything was fine, that I was working hard. I couldn't bear to tell her the truth. The shame was too much." This is the reality for thousands of Filipinos in Kuwait, living a lie to their families while they fight for their lives on the streets. The Kuwaiti government has made some promises of reform, pointing to new labor laws and available shelters for abused workers. But human rights groups argue that these measures are too slow and too small to address a problem of this magnitude. On the ground, survival is a community effort. Church groups, Filipino organizations, and the overwhelmed embassy staff do their best to provide food, legal aid, and plane tickets home. But for many, help comes only after months or years of unimaginable hardship. Alex was eventually repatriated with the help of a community organization, but his story is a painful reminder that the promise of a better life in Kuwait can quickly become a struggle for basic survival. If a nation this small can have a homelessness crisis this large, what does that say about the world's willingness to protect migrant workers? Now brace yourself. The #1 country on this list isn't in the Middle East at all. It's a global superpower, home to millions of Filipinos, and yet it has one of the largest homeless Filipino populations anywhere in the world. We've reached the top of our shocking list, a country that may be the most surprising of all, the United States, the land of opportunity, the place millions of Filipinos have dreamed of calling home. The US is home to a massive Filipino community, with nearly 4.5 million Filipinos and Filipino Americans living here. But behind the promise of the American dream is a harsh, often overlooked reality: homelessness. The numbers are staggering and deeply concerning. An estimated 4,000 to 5,000 Filipinos in America are homeless right now. This isn't just a localized problem, it's a nationwide crisis that extends from the bustling streets of Los Angeles and New York to the quiet suburbs of Chicago and the sunny shores of Hawaii. Let's talk about the story of a man named Oscar, a registered nurse from Manila who came to Los Angeles with his wife and 2 young children. Oscar and his wife had good jobs and were living a comfortable life, saving money to buy a house. But when the pandemic hit, Oscar's wife lost her job and Oscar's hours were cut. They soon found themselves in a financial hole they couldn't climb out of. The crushing cost of living in Los Angeles, where rent and healthcare costs are among the highest in the world, quickly drained their savings. When Oscar's hours were further reduced, they couldn't pay the rent and were evicted. Their entire life was packed into their old minivan. Oscar, a man who dedicated his life to caring for others, found himself one of the homeless Filipino abroad, sleeping in his car with his family, desperately searching for shelter while trying to maintain a brave face for his kids. He told me, "I would put on my uniform and go to work, treating patients, making them feel safe while my own family was sleeping in a car. It felt like a cruel joke. I was a professional, but the system didn't care. It was the darkest time of my life." The United States, for all its wealth, has a fractured and often inadequate social safety net. Even American citizens struggle to find affordable housing. For migrant workers and those who are undocumented, the challenge is multiplied. Language barriers, legal fears, and the absence of strong, culturally sensitive community support systems make them particularly vulnerable. While Filipino community groups, churches, and nonprofits work tirelessly to help, the need far outweighs the resources available. For Oscar, it was a Filipino community center that helped his family find temporary shelter and food. They were eventually able to find another job and a small apartment, but his story is a painful reminder that the promise of the American dream can be a fragile illusion. This crisis underscores a difficult truth that even in a nation of immense prosperity, there is a hidden population of homeless Filipino abroad who have been failed by a system that simply doesn't move fast enough or care enough to save them. This is why the struggles of overseas Filipinos deserve more than just sympathy. They demand concrete, systemic solutions, a call to action for a better, more just world for all. The heartbreaking truth we have uncovered today is that the dream of a better life for our kababayan is being shattered on a global scale. From the ancient streets of Italy to the gleaming towers of the United Arab Emirates, from the frozen promise of Canada to the immense wealth of the United States, thousands of Filipinos are facing the devastating reality of homelessness. These stories are not isolated incidents. They are a direct result of systems that fail to protect the most vulnerable. This crisis demands our collective attention. We cannot stand idly by while our brothers and sisters are rendered invisible. This is a call to action. We must support the organizations on the ground that are fighting for them. We must demand stronger labor laws and better social protections in the countries that profit from their labor. We must ensure that the dream of a better life doesn't end in the cold reality of the streets,